feel of it, and then the way that the bass and the kick drum would be rubbing together and think,
You ever hear a song and just feel it in your chest? That rumble when the bass and kick drum start rubbing together in just the right way. That's the kind of magic Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm used to make together. For years, they weren't just bandmates. They called each other brothers. They shared the road, the music, and a bond that looked unbreakable from the outside. But that closeness, it didn't survive success. The relationship went sour. Lines got crossed, and the fallout became so deep it was never repaired before either man died. Before Robertson passed away, he finally opened up about what really happened between them. And in doing so, he revealed a side of Levon Helm that fans rarely ever heard about. So what did Robertson actually say? Does his final account change how we see Helm? Let's get into it. Before all the drama, before anyone called them legends, there were just 5 guys who didn't even understand what they were building. The band didn't start with some grand ambition or mythology. It started with proximity, long nights that bled into mornings, learning how to stay locked together when everything else felt unstable. They came together in Toronto, pulled from different corners and shaped by totally different lives. 4 of them were Canadian: Rick Danko, Garth Hudson, Richard Manuel, and Robbie Robertson. The 5th was American, Levon Helm. And from the moment he sat behind those drums, everything found its center. Helm didn't just keep time. He grounded the music. He carried the emotional weight of it. What they played together sounded familiar even when it was brand new. Americana threaded through folk, rock, R&B, jazz, and country. It felt lived in, like stories passed hand to hand. That sound would go on to quietly reshape artists like George Harrison, Elton John, The Grateful Dead, Eric Clapton, and Wilco. But it didn't arrive fully formed. It was earned mile by mile, gig by gig. Before they had a name of their own, they were the Hawks. Between 1958 and 1963, they worked as the backing band for rockabilly singer Ronnie Hawkins. Hawkins operated out of Toronto, but his reach stretched across Ontario. He was sharp-eyed and controlling, the kind of leader who didn't compete with talent. He absorbed it. When a promising band showed up on the circuit, Hawkins didn't challenge them. He just hired their best players instead. That's how Robertson, Danko, and Manuel ended up under his command. Helm had joined even earlier, back in 1957. By the following year, fresh out of high school, he became the full-time drummer and followed Hawkins north from Arkansas to Ontario. One by one, the others followed. Robertson came in, then Danko, then Manuel. Hudson arrived last. For a brief stretch, Stan Seelist was part of the lineup too. At that stage, they weren't equals. They were apprentices learning what endurance really meant. In the late 1950s, Hawkins and the guys played regularly at Pop Ivis Summer Garden Pavilion in Port Dover. That room became a quiet hinge point. In May 1961, Hawkins watched a 17-year-old Danko perform there and recruited him on the spot. At that same pavilion, they saw Manuel sing with his band, the Rebels. His voice didn't reach for attention. It claimed it. Hawkins took over managing the Rebels, then steadily pulled Manuel away, convinced him to leave his band and join the Hawks by September. Hudson resisted longer than the rest. He had a college degree and a clear path toward becoming a music teacher. Rock music to him was supposed to stay on the margins. But the Hawks admired his fearless organ playing and kept pushing. When Hudson finally agreed, he did it on his own terms. Each member would pay him $10 a week for music lessons, and they would buy him a new Lowry organ. From that moment on, Hudson became the band's compass. Theory lived with him. Questions landed with him. The sound widened and deepened because of him. With Hawkins, they recorded a handful of singles and earned a reputation as the tightest rock group in Toronto's booming scene. Hawkins demanded stamina. Long club shows followed by all-night rehearsals again and again. The grind worked. They grew sharper, faster, more confident. Dylan agreed. From September 1965 through May 1966, the Hawks backed Dylan on one of the most volatile tours rock music had ever seen. Folk purists heckled night after night. Dylan pushed harder. Helm absorbed the anger, and it wore him down. After just over a month, he walked away, spending much of the next year working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. The recording sessions from that period reflected the strain. Only one usable single emerged. Frustrated with New York studios, Dylan shifted sessions to Nashville. There, Robertson's guitar sliced through blonde on blonde, especially on leopard skin pillbox hat. The rest of the Hawks weren't present. Then came Manchester. On May 17, 1966, at the Free Trade Hall, an audience member shouted Judas. Dylan paused, fired back, then turned to the Hawks with a single instruction. Play it loud. They did. The moment crystallized into legend. When Dylan suffered a motorcycle accident that July, everything slowed. He retreated to Woodstock. The Hawks drifted back to bar gigs, even briefly backing Tiny Tim. Then Dylan reached out again, this time quietly, drawing them north. In February 1967, Danko, Hudson, and Manuel rented a large pink house in West Saugerties. They called it Big Pink. Inside that house, the pressure finally lifted. The music became casual again. Songs formed without expectations or deadlines. Tapes rolled simply because they could. Those recordings became the basement tapes. And somewhere along the way, the name that had followed them all along finally settled. They were always just a band. But by 1968, they made it official. By the fall of 1967, the long, strange chapter with Bob Dylan quietly closed. The sessions ended in October. Levon Helm was back in the fold, and for the first time the Hawks were standing on their own feet. Big Pink stopped feeling like a hiding place and started feeling like a beginning. Songs began to form there, not as assignments, not as backing parts, but as stories that belonged to them. When it came time to step into a studio, there was still one thing they didn't have. A name. That uncertainty fit them. Stories about how the band became the band never quite line up, which feels kind of appropriate. In The Last Waltz, Richard Manuel remembered tossing around names like the Honkies or the Crackers, a nickname they'd already used backing Dylan at a Woody Guthrie tribute in early 1968. The record label shut that down fast. Robertson offered a simpler version of events. When they worked with Dylan, everyone just called them the band. And eventually the word stopped being a placeholder and became an identity. At first they didn't like it. Felt too plain, too exposed. Over time it started to feel right. Humble on the surface, bold underneath. Their first record, Music from Big Pink, arrived in July 1968 and landed like a revolution. Critics heard something different immediately. The album carried 3 songs written or co-written with Dylan. But it was the weight that lodged itself into culture, especially after its use in Easy Rider. Momentum followed quickly. In early 1969, they toured, played Winterland, showed up at Woodstock, then crossed the Atlantic to perform with Dylan at the Isle of Wight. That same year, they headed to Los Angeles to record their second album, simply called The Band. Everything about it pushed against the moment it was released into. The cover looked worn in. The songs reached backward into American history. The night they drove Old Dixie down carried the Civil War in its bones. King Harvest told a labor story without dressing it up. The attention was relentless. Rolling Stone couldn't get enough of them. In January 1970, they appeared on the cover of Time, the first rock group to do so since the Beatles. The band simply stopped. Helm was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1998. For a time, his voice disappeared entirely. When it returned, it sounded different, but it was still his. He kept playing until he died on April 19, 2012. The drummer who held everything together was gone. Now Hey Race, where it gets real complicated. Robertson made his name as lead guitarist and primary songwriter. From the outside, it looked like a shared rise. 5 men, 1 sound. But inside the group, the balance was never as even as fans believed. Helm openly accused Robertson of taking most of the songwriting credits, and by extension the royalties. In Helm's telling, Robertson and their manager Albert Grossman controlled the publishing while the rest of the band lived on leftovers. Helm called it guitaritis, the moment when one member starts believing everyone else exists to support him. Robertson never denied that he held the reins. He just said there was a reason. In his 2016 memoir testimony, he painted a far darker picture of life inside the band. According to Robertson, heavy drinking and drug use weren't side issues. They were constant. He wrote openly about Helm, Danko, and Manuel, describing a period when heroin and alcohol were part of the daily rhythm. Robertson didn't claim innocence. He admitted he experimented, but he drew a hard line between trying something and being consumed by it. His addiction, he said, was work. While others unraveled, he felt forced into the role of caretaker, handling business decisions, managing grossmen, keeping the machinery running. He said they leaned on him to take control because someone had to. That control became the very thing Helm could never forgive. By 2020, Robertson was more reflective, but no less honest. He admitted that being in the band sometimes felt like waiting for disaster. On good days, he feared someone might die. On bad days, he watched people insist they were fine when they clearly weren't. When Robertson spoke about leaving after the last waltz, he didn't frame it as betrayal. He framed it as necessity. He said it was survival time. Helm was right about one thing. He did walk away, but what followed hurt more. Robertson said Helm's bitterness didn't fade with time. It hardened, yet the story didn't end in anger. Before Helm died of cancer in 2012, Robertson went to see him in the hospital. No cameras, no audience, just two men at the end of a shared road. Afterward, Robertson wrote that he sat with Helm and thought about the beautiful, impossible times they had lived through together. He called Helm one of the most extraordinarily talented people he had ever known. He called him an older brother. That final moment didn't erase the feud. It didn't rewrite history, but it did something quieter. It closed the circle. Robertson's truth about Levon Helm was never simple. It wasn't praise or condemnation. It was acknowledgement of brilliance, of chaos, of a brotherhood that created something timeless, then tore itself apart trying to survive it. So do you think the band would have stayed together longer if the songwriting credits had been shared differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below.